on mindfulness. I don't know when I first heard this concept of mindfulness. I think it's very recent. I should think it's not more than 2 or 3 years ago. And apart from what it always prompts somewhat foolishly in my mind, being on an underground railway station and there being announcements, mind the gap, mind the gap. And so it was something which I didn't really think about. When I came across it, and now of course it is very widespread, and you have teachers of mindfulness, and you no doubt have degrees in mindfulness, and you have book after book on the subject. What it is really about, of course, is practices not dissimilar to many traditionally done by religious groups like Buddhists or Hindus or Christian ascetics, to pay attention to the moment, to calm down, to control your emotions and your mind in a way which relaxes you and makes it easier to face up to the problems around you. So it's associated with things like yoga or other meditative practices. And it's not difficult to see why it should have become so popular and widespread. Its particular popularity might even be in some way connected with the COVID outbreak, because people were forced into a state of mindfulness in a way by COVID. Most people had been on the treadmill of their jobs and rushing around and commuting to work and so on. And then suddenly they stopped abruptly, and they were at home and they were with their families and they couldn't go out. And apart from Zooming and electronic communications, they were thrown on their inner resources. And many people found this very difficult, and many people found it pleasant and relaxing. And so you had longer time to consider the purpose of life, the meaning of your life, what you should do. And there sprang up many advisors on how you should approach that, what you should think about, mental practices of mind control. I've found it something which, in a way, I've been concerned with for a long time in my life, how I can improve my creativity and my work and my contribution, but never very explicitly, never using words like mindfulness, just paying attention to certain mental practices. And now that I know about it and read articles and books around the theme of mindfulness, I can see that it's extremely helpful for many people and useful. It gives a framework for self-awareness, self-interrogation. It can obviously veer into selfishness and self-preoccupation and narcissistic behavior, and occasionally my wife tells me I think too much about myself or I'm narcissistic. Probably true, but it also can relax and release you. So there are various practices, and perhaps there's no better way to summarize them in the 4 forms of Zen meditation. One is walking. When you walk, either alone or with someone, the mechanical action of walking slows you down, and your mind is released and engaged, hopefully, if you're not wearing earphones or looking at a mobile phone, engaged with the sounds and sights around you. And so I find a good walk is a form of mindfulness, as Zen predicts. A second form is some form of activity which is not totally engrossing, but keeps your eyes and attention mildly interested. And the form Zen mentions is feeding fish. I had a pond of goldfish, and it was certainly the case that standing on the edge of it and watching these beautiful fish and throwing them something and watching them rise and take it was very restorative. But it applies to many different forms similar to that. So for me, gardening, just going around pruning plants or picking blackberries, cooking a curry, all these sorts of things which partly preoccupy you, but also let your mind flow free. And I know my mother found that many of her creative ideas came when she was doing those sorts of things. So that's the second kind. The third in Zen is drinking tea. And for me, that also is one of the mindful exercises I do. There are two features of it which I think contribute to it. One is that tea takes some time to prepare. So as in the Japanese or Chinese tea ceremonies, you are there for a while they brew the tea and prepare it and then serve it, and then you drink it and you talk about it. So Japanese tea ceremony can last for several hours. And the art of making tea, the way of tea, which turns it into almost a religious activity, chado or Dao way, is very calming just in the actions and putting away all other activities and thoughts in a tea house, where you take off your watch and you take off your shoes and you don't talk about anything serious, and by the end of it you feel calm. Alongside is the tea itself. Having written a book about tea and looked at its constituents, I can see that the constituents have various chemicals which calm the mind and clear it, and you can achieve that. Even I can achieve that with just one glass of green tea, and my mind clears and focuses and anxieties disappear. So those are three of the Zen ways of attaining mindfulness. And the fourth is meditation, is the very intense form of meditation you have in Zen and some Hindu practices, where you sit and you try and expel all distracting thoughts. So you just empty your mind. That I find extremely difficult and not something I particularly attempt or relish, because I like to have my mind filled with interesting thoughts. But it is something, of course, that from time to time we have to do, and particularly when we go to sleep and wake up in the middle of the night, you find your mind crowded with all sorts of things that are going to happen, or worries or whatever, and trying to control those and get rid of them is important. So some kind of Zen concentration meditation. I do every day just a little yoga, and just the breathing and the exercises does, I think, both my body and my mind good. So mindfulness is something which you can work out your own regime, though I'm sure if you look on YouTube or elsewhere under mindfulness, you'll find much advice and many exercises you can do. I find that I'm now, as in these talks, in a way trying to contribute for myself in talking, and hopefully for a few of those who listen, some suggestions about mindfulness, not directly on the subject, but by analysing and describing and calming down worries about all sorts of things which I've talked about, from war to disease to envy to all sorts of subjects, and by describing, analysing and putting them in their place, it hopefully drains away a little bit of the anxiety and busyness around our lives. So be mindful of yourself.